were able to be part of this. Super cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Really appreciate you tuning in for our live chat today. I'm Chad Atwell, based out of the Denver area. I work with Candor IQ, which is hosting this event today, along with our other prestigious co-speakers, hosts as well. I'm also the one who's not wearing stripes today, so if you need to organize, it's just, yeah, I'm the solid color here. So. But I work with Candor IQ. We're a HR tech company that works in the area of compensation. We'll definitely get into headcount management today, sort of trying to bridge the gap between both HR and finance, which is a lot of what we'll talk about today from a topic perspective. We're also a sponsor of the People Leader Accelerator, which Andrew is a founder of. So I will go ahead and kick it over to him for an intro. He can tell us a little bit more about PLA.
Great. Well, thanks so much for hosting us, Chad, and Michelle and Theresa. Great to see you again. Awesome to all be together here. I'm Andrew Bartlow, call it 30 years-ish in-house in human resources operating roles. Have been the head of the function multiple times. Startups, mid-stage, growth stage, took a company public twice. And maybe 8 years ago, I pulled my parachute, tried to go independent. I've continued that. And started, really what is my passion, which is People Leader Accelerator. It's a educational program and community for human resources leaders. So I've walked in the shoes of folks like Michelle and Theresa, and now this program and this community exists to support people like them. Hey, we're looking forward to supporting your listeners and viewers here, trying to help other HR people do what they do even better. So thanks a lot, Chad.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Michelle, you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, Michele MacDougall, PLA graduate. So thanks, Andrew. I'm a total rewards and people operations leader. I come from a variety of backgrounds, pretty diverse, from retail, event tech, insure tech, digital health. So lots of different experiences to talk about today. And most recently came from Shockwave Medical, which is a medical device company, as their head of talent acquisition and HR operations.
And Theresa.
Thank you. I am another Total Rewards leader. I run Total Rewards at Nirvana Insurance, an insure tech startup with a multi-entity structure. I also have a diverse background, again, from retail to ed tech, HR tech. I'm forgetting semiconductors along the way. I have specialized in joining startups around the time when they're ready to build out their job architecture, exit a PEO, and start taking on Total Rewards into their own space. And I am also a PLA graduate. Wonderful program.
That's awesome. Yeah, very good. Yeah, not just a coincidence that we have both Michelle and Theresa on the call today. So definitely lots of great experience with PLA. And you both work out of the same living room, which is amazing. I don't know how you're doing that.
Yeah, let's get in the pool.
Yeah, right after this call.
I'm down. I'll be there. I'll be right there. So I talked a little bit about Candor IQ as a solution. I lead customer success for them. I'm also a former HR practitioner, consultant. I've worked in this space for a very long time, and I've kind of straddled between both consulting and technology. And so I lead a lot of our advisory work as well. I work with our customers because systems are dependent on customers having the right data. And sometimes job architecture is something that customers can miss. Certainly startup organizations sometimes don't get to job architecture right away, market data, building out pay structures, those sorts of things. So I work with a lot of our customers in that space. One of the things I've always had a hand in as well is obviously compensation. You think a lot about overall total workforce spend. It's the biggest expenditure for most companies is talent, and how do you plan for that? So what drew me to Candor IQ was this idea that you could be working in one platform that has both very deep compensation data, but then that also feeds into your overall workforce plan. Now, that is really where I think the magic happens for a lot of our customers. You've got the ability to not just look at current headcount, but evaluate future headcount, look at opportunities of growing into different markets, all of those things. So we're talking about this topic of position management. That's the word that we put into the title today. But position management oftentimes is called different things. Sometimes it's headcount management, sometimes it's workforce planning, variety of different things. I think of position management as being sort of on the more technical end of that continuum, where you have very specific, some people call them chairs or buckets, or, you create the number of positions that you think are appropriate for your business. And then you fill those positions with job titles and locations and eventually people. And that is what essentially builds your position management plan over time. The key part of what we'll talk through today is how position management kind of fits in between and within both HR and finance, and how do especially HR professionals, HR leaders in this space, how do we make sure that we are collaborating with finance on this topic? Where do we very often miss things when it comes to collaborating and connecting with our financial counterparts, and essentially help our organizations plan for the future? I think that's what most of us are really trying to do in HR, is really achieve a common goal around what the company can do better in the future, and how do we get the right combination of people and skills and everything else that goes along with that. So, Andrew, I'll kick it back over to you. You've been in the space a long time. You've seen a lot of different approaches from various companies, that sort of thing. What do you feel like often gets missed, or where have you seen some success in collaboration between both HR and finance?
Yeah, thanks, Chad. And great topic. Super valuable for human resources pros. And by way of context, I led the workforce planning effort for the United States' largest savings and loan. Once upon a time, rest in peace, Washington Mutual, giant mortgage company. And in their case, workforce planning had a lot to do with mortgage interest rates. When rates are going down, everybody wants to refinance. You need a ton of people to underwrite and process a loan. When rates start going up, nobody wants to refinance and volume totally dries up. So we were hiring and laying off in swings of tens of thousands of people based off of the Fed interest rate environment. And so I led for the entire company a workforce planning effort for that. So I've done that at scale. And then through People Leader Accelerator, mentoring and supporting other HR leaders, we've had 120 graduates or so. And I would put a stake in the ground and say one of the highest and best ways that a human resources pro can contribute to their org is around org design and workforce planning. And peel back the onion just a little bit. What that means is, do you have the resources, the human resources, the talent that you need to deliver upon your organization's goals? And how do you predict that? How do you make sure that you're not overspent or over-resourced, which ends up being really costly? And so that is a key contributor of value from the HR arena. And I would encourage HR leaders to really lean into that. Hey, it's our opportunity to be consultative, to be predictive, to have conversations with business leaders to figure out, what do we need? It's not just an order taker role, like a pharmacist, hey, I ask for X and you go deliver it. I think we have an opportunity to act more like a physician, more like a consultant who says, hey, I have this pain. Well, let's explore that and let's see the best way to address it. And maybe that is hiring 10 roles that exist today. Maybe that means redesigning the work in some way. And I'd suggest that if HR pros don't proactively lean in, drive those conversations, somebody else will do it instead. Usually finance. Finance will usually, lean into budget. That's a big, part of cost. And finance will have those conversations about what does each department need. So really, I'd suggest that the best way to do it is to do it together. Partner up with financial planning and analysis, or if you're a small company, your CFO. Have a three-way conversation with individual department and business leaders. And that way, you're operating in sync. The resources are tied to the budget, are tied to the place the work gets done. And when it's not working is when one or more of those groups get disconnected. And often when HR kind of steps back into a reactive mode and backfills and fills an order and treats things like a one-off. So our big opportunity is to think about it as an integrated system. It is to get involved even if nobody's asking us to. Like that's the place to add value.
Right. Yeah, no, it's great overview. Really appreciate the perspective. I think a lot of us have seen more bad examples in this space than we have good ones. And that very common bad example is finance approves budget and HR has to work within that. And you're just never really brought to the table, or you don't exactly get to have that collaborative sort of discussion about what we actually need, what we're trying to achieve, those sorts of things. The budget is just the budget. And now it's written in stone, and there's really not much else that we can do about that. So we just kind of have to work within it. But Theresa, Michele, what do you think? Is that reflective of what you've seen in some different organizations?
Yeah, I mean, when things aren't going well, what I see is I think finance feels like that they've lost control, right, of the plan. They don't know what's here or there. And so I've seen extra meetings, like headcount meetings happening twice a week, because everybody just has to get in the room and like reconcile the sheet and live approve the recs. That's one thing that I've seen. Lots of times it's just lots of reconciling by finance, like hours a month spent on trying to reconcile, and then they've got to research, right? They're reaching out to the HR business partner who's reaching out to the business, and everyone's trying to figure out exactly what's happening in terms of hiring. And then also just like additional levels of approval. It kind of goes back to the meeting, right? Where you're just like adding on, like now things have to go to the CEO, whereas before that wasn't possible. So all of this slows down your hiring. All of this means you're not meeting your hiring plan. It's putting your company objectives at risk.
I would agree with both Andrew and Michele here. A collaborative and positive working relationship with finance is essential to actually being a strategic HR partner. There is no place for an adversarial relationship there. I think that that's one of the most important relationships I like to build when I'm working with an organization, to really understand their perspective and to ensure that what we are building, because we really do own the structure of the organization, right? That lives in the people team. What we are building always keeps their needs in mind. They're informed and consulted along the way, and we get buy-in and alignment there first before waterfalling out from there.
Makes sense. That's great. Yeah. I think even the organizations or some of the customers that we've worked with, even when they do have active sort of, everyday kind of managed headcount plans that they're working against, it's still very complex. It's very disconnected in a way where maybe they didn't exactly identify all of the approval flows that they needed. And what happens when you need to start out thinking that you're going to hire one level of engineer, and then you end up hiring two levels above that. And it kind of blows apart your cost plan, on some of those things. Like, where was the approval and the review process around those kinds of things? That's even a lot of the organizations that have diligently put some real meat behind this. They've built out the spreadsheet. They've done all these other things. There's just not the level of coordination on workflow, approvals, and those things as well. So I think ultimately the symptom, going back to Andrew, what you said, if we are the physician, oftentimes the symptom is surprise. Like we ended up hiring somebody two levels above what we thought we were going to, because that's what that's what the engineering leader at the time thought that they really needed. And nobody really had any input or say or anything like that. So now you multiply that over dozens of hires, hundreds of hires, you're just, asking for trouble. Your budget is just not going to hold up as part of that. I mean, so kind of the inverse of that, or the other side of that coin, is what does good position management really look like? I think we've kind of established the foundation. It does start with a good relationship. It's about that relationship. It's not necessarily about just the spreadsheet and who has access to it, who doesn't have access to it. It really does start off with this sort of cultural collaboration between both HR and finance. So how do you kind of build that? What are some of the tactical things that you've done with finance over the years to kind of build that trust, to kind of work with them? I think about it, even psychologically, like how do you kind of come together for joint goal planning, and what is it that they're trying to achieve versus what you're trying to achieve? Some of those things. Anybody want to take a run at that one?
Yeah, I can jump in there. I would say foundational trust and shared definitions. I think that when you join an organization that doesn't have a solid job architecture, that's step one. You and finance need to understand and agree what the different roles are in the organization, what the different levels are. And then once the shared framework is there and they understand that we're both speaking the same language, we are not talking about some theoretical sales role. We're saying, here's the business case for why we need to add a P4 sales role in this region. It makes that relationship much easier. And there can be a true back and forth and a true discussion about whether or not that meets our business needs, rather than coming at it from two different perspectives.
I wholly really appreciate you mentioning job architecture in that one, because that's near and dear to my heart for sure. And I think anybody in compensation, if you've worked in that space before, it's very much similar to a lot of finance functions. You're working with so many numbers and that sort of thing. But ultimately, kind of under all of this is this foundation of job architecture. How do we define what roles are, what levels are, different sort of skills, even to a certain extent within the business, that sort of thing as well. Yeah. Michelle, Andrew?
Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
I think my analogy is kids playing together in the same sandbox. Like you're on the same team, you're playing the same game, you're trying to help your organization win. You're in the same sandbox, so you should have some shared information. That shared information is what our roster is today, what our pay rates are today. It's still shocking to me how many organizations operate out of a different HRIS than payroll. And yes, allegedly they integrate, blah, blah, blah. In most cases, they don't. They don't do it immediately. It's not tracked exactly the same way. So whatever tool or resource you use, maybe Candor IQ, make sure that you're working off of the same roster with the same titling, with the same labor cost information, and taking the trust concept a step further. Often finance likes to operate in secrecy. Often HR likes to operate with confidentiality.
Sure.
If we can have trust in our partners across the aisle, we can share some notes about the conversation that whoever in finance or HR just had with the head of customer success to talk about whatever their needs are for the future. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean more meetings, and it doesn't have to mean blind trust. It means one shared repository of information, so you're working off of the same data. Like that seems to be a foundational requirement to work well together.
Yeah. And I'm keen on the word integration that you talked about, because I think we have, I think in the state of HR technology, we are as good as it's ever been as far as being able to bring these systems together, to integrate, to play together in the same sandbox, all of those things. But they still aren't set up in the right data models are just not the same. We work with customers that have their own FP&A tool, and I will never tell a finance person in the sandbox, you can't have your FP&A tool. Like, you have to have that, right? For accounting purposes and everything. Like, I'm not going to take that away from you. But how do we get these things to work together, to stay in sync, and just be able to kind of be off that one source of truth, right? Yeah. Michele, any other, perspective on what you've seen that's worked really well, or other things?
I'm a physician. I'm playing in the sand. I'm just trying to keep all my analogies correct. I think it's the transparency. If you have position management, means you can just be more agile. And I think kind of like the old way of doing things, and I mean, I don't know if we even remember it this way, right? But like, you would, once a year in, I don't know, the summer, you'd start benchmarking. And you would tell your company what you could expect, like what the increases are going to look like for next year. That eventually would get approved. And then eventually, like, you run your cycle the next year. And even the head count along with that might get approved, like, start getting approved in October. It doesn't really change, even though the business could materially change between August and, say, February. So being able to do it on a more agile basis, even quarterly, be able to take a look at it monthly, really, like, that single source, right, where everyone can just look without having the conversation. I think that's when it's working really, really well.
Yeah. No, you bring up a great point. I think we've sort of focused on kind of how you start this process. Like, let's get everybody to the table. Let's kind of have that collaboration in place from the very beginning. But the real test of any of these plans is your ability to react over time. And Andrew was talking about wide swings in hiring and layoffs and all of those things. I don't think companies necessarily are going to get away from doing that in certain situations. Certainly with the amount of, like, just technology advancements that we've had, its impact on the workforce model for a lot of organizations. Like, those changes, big changes, small changes, are going to continue to happen over time. The test becomes, is everyone involved with those changes when they happen? It's not just a decree that we have to cut by a certain number of people, and HR, you're going to go out and execute this plan. It really is coming together and sort of collaborating on, well, what are the alternatives? Like, can we talk about, organizations that are really successful at decreasing compensation in a way where it does save the ability that you don't have to lay off as many people. The ability to look at different workforce models where you're not just hiring full-time employees with all the loaded benefit costs and everything else that goes along with it. Maybe you're trying to be more flexible when it comes to contractors and gig workers, contingent workers, all of those things too. So I think there's a lot of things that test that relationship throughout the year. And certainly once you have a plan in place, that plan is going to constantly evolve, just like you said, right? Yeah. I think one thing that I see with our customers that are kind of moving onto a platform to manage this process is they very early at the beginning will say, well, we've got to clean up what we're already using. We've got to clean up our worksheet that we've been using for the past, few years, and, kind of get back to a level of where everybody's agreed on that. I think it's, I don't know, to a certain extent, them getting familiar and comfortable with the idea that more eyes potentially are going to be on this plan. If you open it up in a system, there's a lot of concern around who's going to have access to it, who has the ability to request additional headcount, what kind of approval flow does that go through? Like, there's so many different things about trying to make this a really active plan that works throughout the year. A lot of organizations just don't quite get there on that. But why does this matter now? Why are we talking about headcount planning? As far as being able to plan more collaboratively as a group, like what do you think is the real value to the organizations that you've worked with in the past? What do you think is potentially more important now than it's been in the future? Just being able to maybe crystallize a few thoughts as far as why is this important to companies today? Anybody want to take a shot at that? Go for it.
I'll jump in. I think there are two major influences happening now. One is a greater influence on profitability versus pure top line or headcount growth. I think during the SaaS explosion and then post-COVID, big hiring waves, land grabs, like lots of growth opportunity. And then something switched where companies started caring about the bottom line results at earlier and earlier stages.
Sure.
It may not be true for some of the best funded, AI unicorns, but profitability and productivity matter more now than they did, 5 years ago. Second, I already mentioned it, artificial intelligence. AI and new tools and new technology and new capabilities are causing everybody to take another look at our resources and figure out, do we have what we need? How will work change? Can we get more done with less? So those two influences, I think, are causing most organizations. I had a mentoring call just a few minutes before this where someone was looking at their customer success organization and trying to figure out what are our needs going forward and where does AI play. I think that's happening everywhere.
We almost made it halfway through, Andrew, and you just had to mention AI. We couldn't just wait a couple minutes longer. I mean, Well, I think that's definitely true. I'm interested, Theresa, Michelle, what do you think is the advantage of including AI as part of the workforce, like being able to kind of really count that as part of your overall workforce strategy? It kind of leans into that same space around different workforce models, contingent labor, that sort of thing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would say AI is one of many tools available for the people team to help the business meet its goals. And the framework I've been taking to think about head versus tool is the visual of think of your organization as a net. The natural gaps in the weave are bandwidth issues. That's the work that slips through because there are not enough hands, not enough people. Tools fill those. A torn strand, though, is something different entirely. The net is broken. A skill is missing from your organization, and no tool properly fixes a torn strand. That's when you need a head. And I think that taking that analogy has been helpful in helping organizations separate bandwidth issues. What can we automate? What tools are available to us to streamline these existing processes? And what actually is something missing from the organization that we need to bring in and then level up with tools?
That's amazing. Yeah, great visual on that. Now I'm thinking about volleyball because we've got nets and sandboxes and everything like that. That's great. Yeah.
The way that I'm thinking about it, sort of this managing humans and how it really changes what leaders need to do and really changes, and I think hopefully what we're all doing, particularly in HR, in our jobs every day. I mean, what's really important is critical thinking. It's judgment. And I think it's still domain expertise. I think we've all had, I'm sure each of us in the topics that we are really knowledgeable about have gone to one of the frontier models and asked questions and gotten something totally crazy. But there are other people who don't know as much as we do, doing the same thing and getting the same AI slop answer. So some of the skills, the truly human skills right now, and I say right now, I mean, these things are it's evolving constantly, but those are the things that are really important. And so I do think that role clarity, and kind of going back to the org chart and the workforce planning, I think that's something else that needs to be agile because so much is changing constantly. Take a look at it, but it could be different in 3 months. Who knows?
Oh yeah, I was 100% arguing with Claude yesterday about how to calculate a range spread. I absolutely was. I could not get it to work correctly. But I think kind of the source or kind of the center for a lot of this is not just the roles or the job titles necessarily. Like we've mentioned skills a couple of times, and I think that's another missing element for a lot of these companies where you're not really identifying, future need around skills, level of capabilities, those sorts of things. I can tell you, I've been in this space a long time. I honestly have not seen a lot of companies pull it off really well. Job architecture, I think a lot of companies know what that looks like. They understand how it works and why it's important. I run into learning and development people who obviously want to do more in the skills space for their organization, but they seem to be the only ones. Why, or have you seen like skills play a more important role in this space, this idea of like workforce planning, position management? Has anybody seen a good example of that? No? Really? Wow. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
I'd be interested. Anybody who's watching, if you have a great example or a story you're telling me, please let us know.
Please share.
I think my own thoughts about skills-based, like really focusing on skills is, at first I thought that was a good idea, but I think that the more that I pay attention in that space, a job is not just a bunch of tasks, a job that a human being does. There is more than that. It's a person in a role is not just a bunch of skills. So there are other aspects always to the jobs that I think generally, senior leadership isn't thinking about it quite on that level. And I think that's something that we can drive is we need humans in the loop. What are they going to be doing? And what is it that they're bringing to the table? How do they fit?
I might reframe even a little further and suggest, rather than a skills-based design, I might think of demand versus supply. And demand is defining what is the work to be done. And to the extent possible, like Michele said, a job is not just a series of tasks, but there are certain things, especially in multi-incumbent jobs, that need to be done. And so, like, what's the rate? Like, how many things need to be done? That's the demand. And then the supply is between humans, whether those are employees, contractors, vendors, and it might be useful to break those down, or tools and automations. What is the supply needed to deliver against that demand? And hey, as we get better tools, the pricing is still kind of a question mark. In some cases, the AI pricing is more expensive than a human. But understanding, how best to match our supply, which should be fungible to a certain extent, against the work needed to be done. And I think that's where HR can partner with business to be creative about what the best way to build that stack might look like.
I want to say that for the people team as an industry, this advent of new tools and accessibility of new tools is a unique opportunity that we haven't seen in the past. We have always had a more difficult time making a case for headcount than revenue generating units. We have always been stretched for bandwidth, not my organization right now, the people team everywhere I've worked. And all of a sudden, we all have the opportunity to, for lack of a better example, have a P1 working for us in our function, teach them the basic things. Of course, we still need to check the work, as we would if we hired an entry-level person into this function and trained them into it. So we all of a sudden have much more access to bandwidth easing tools and systems than we ever have in the past. And it has, in my organization, made a monumental impact to the speed at which we are able to act and the speed to which we can help the business operate.
That's awesome. That's so encouraging to hear. I think another really great reason why it's important to have sort of this unified approach, this plan across the board, because I've talked about AI in general, like working with organizations on how they structure an intentional strategy around which AI agents they're using, all of those things. But it is very much a grassroots thing in a lot of organizations. Many different agents are now being compiled over the course of the entire organization, and most would never know like how many agents or different types of technologies are actually being used there. So another great example, I think, where finance is probably very interested in how much this is costing us, what's the overall, the tokens and everything else that goes into the cost model around it. HR and talent were more interested in what are we really achieving by using these tools? How is it increasing people's performance and working together? How do managers manage these teams when you've got more tools and agents that are being used for those? So again, different sides of the same coin, but definitely worth focusing on collaboration, that kind of thing. Well, I think, just to bring it to a practical level, I wanted to ask, what are some of maybe the things like statistics, or analytics, things that we can measure that both HR and finance are going to sort of rally around? We've talked a lot about how finance is more interested in sort of cost in general. HR, we're a little more focused on sort of internal development. At the end of the day, we all focus on achievement, right? Our ability to impact the performance of the organization, to achieve the goals that we have for ourselves. Is there anything that you've used jointly between finance and HR that kind of brings those different measures together, allows you to kind of look on the same song sheet on how the company is doing overall? Andrew, have you seen anything on that?
Cost is an easier way to do it. If you can capture the work to be done, and that will be different job to job, group to group. Let's use an example. Let's say lease renewals for a company that rents vacation properties. How many leases can be renewed? And you have some sort of business plan estimate of, we want to do 1,000 lease renewals this calendar year. Just picking round numbers and simple examples. That's the demand. Share that on a document between HR and finance, and do the same in property maintenance, do the same in customer service calls, like whatever it is, have your demand clearly articulated where HR, finance, and the business lead is in a line around what that demand is. And then you can match up, how are we servicing that demand? Maybe we have an AI agent that is doing automatic renewals, and that satisfies currently half of those. But if we have some projected improvements, it will take care of 80% of those. And then we have humans who can do X number of widgets, who can do X number of these things per week. That adds up to a year. And so like be sharing information about what is the work to be done, what it takes to do it, how it will be served, whether that's being done by humans or tech, and how that changes over time. And then you can also be in a line around the cost of it. It'll take some tokens for the agent to do it, and it'll take payroll for the people to do it. To simplify that, let's say, share your information between finance and HR, work out of the same songbook.
Nice. Theresa and Michele, have you seen any, even if you don't talk about metrics themselves, like ways that you share or kind of keep both teams aligned around common goals on that?
Yeah, I would say that it goes back to the definition piece I talked about earlier. Define what tools are available and what they can do. Define what roles exist in our job architecture and what may be needed. And with that shared framework, to Andrew's point, communicate in the same language using the same system or tool. Whether it's a spreadsheet, whether it's a position management system, as long as you're speaking the same language and there is a consistent single source of truth, you're going to get what you need from both teams. And I think that the result of that is an ease in the communication between the two branches of the organization.
On a really granular level, where I've seen both teams kind of hash out and come to some kind of agreement in terms of like a definition. And this goes like cost and demand and just the plan for the year, the quarter in terms of hiring is the target start date. Like finance wants to know when that is going to hit. And we want to know because we need to back out from there to appropriately hire for that role. And I found that that's just, if you can also just really agree on that, it's a good starting point anyway, to agree on other things.
I think that seems to be one of the biggest levers that I see companies pull when they need to make adjustments. That is like, we know, like let's just take the ideal state. We're making more money. We've got more success than we can support with current staff. We need to accelerate hiring, and we need to know what the impact of that is going to be. And you start hiring 3 months sooner than you thought you were going to, that's going to have a cost on the business, and everybody needs to understand what that cost is going to be. To the extent everyone's arguing about what that number is, you're just going to slow things down. So, but the opposite is true too. If things are slowing down, you're not hiring quite as much, you can push back those target dates on a few and really understand like what is the savings and what are we potentially saving ourselves by putting off hiring to a certain extent. Maybe that offsets some of the eventual layoffs if you have to do any, towards the end of the year. Nobody wants to be in that position, but potentially you can avoid some of those as part of it as well. Yeah.
And
well, I think
scenario planning.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, scenario planning is great. So just having that initial starting point is one thing, managing it through the year. You get towards the end of the year, then you have this big, how do we take this into the future? How do we take this into a 1-year plan, a 3-year plan, however it is that you want to do that? So scenario building around that is really key. I think one of the things I really like about our product is it's not just collaborative throughout the year when you request new headcount, that sort of thing. The scenario planning is as well. You can bring people from the business into a scenario plan, have them essentially say, look, let's do one scenario that is a high growth scenario, another one's a low growth scenario. And you tell us, how many people do you think you need given these parameters, what we're trying to achieve, your different levels of skills and capabilities that you're going to need to achieve these things. So it's not just finance and HR stuck together trying to figure that out themselves. You're actually involving different parts of the business. And we haven't touched on that as far as like other business leaders, operations, that sort of thing. I'm interested, have you had any experience bringing different leaders from the business into this process as well?
Chad, I've got a big smile going right now. And that as you've described sharing the information and doing the scenario planning, and Michelle, really glad that you brought up that concept. In most organizations, this is happening. It's happening with someone in a PMO or ops analyst or chief of staff, like somebody's doing it. Maybe it's in FP&A. And this is like the exact use case of, is it a person or is it technology? So like use a product like Candor IQ, and it can give you a framework by which to do the scenario planning and modeling and costs and revenues and org structure and all that. Or somebody can do it in PowerPoint, Prezi, Excel, use your tool, and it's a human who's building it. So in either case, it's probably happening. And if it's not, it should be. And this is an opportunity to decide, is it being better served by having a human manually build it? Or is it better served having a tech product with a framework where you can just drop it in?
That's great. Yeah. Theresa, have you seen different parts of the business get involved in that process where you're actively going out and trying to build those scenarios?
Yeah, it's absolutely a collaborative effort, and it's typically the head of people who's communicating with leaders, who's trying to connect with each business unit head and draw these hypotheticals for what's going to happen with our business in the upcoming year and how will we respond to that. One piece that I think a lot of organizations miss is Position management goes a little bit beyond new hires. It also talks about what the organization looks like in terms of, will people be promoted into roles? Does this role that exists today exist in our future scenario? And I think perhaps there's an opportunity for a lot of organizations to start thinking about that, because the absence of including those pieces in your analysis ends up resulting in a fairly top-heavy org where everyone is being put up for promotion because they deserve one. And that's a challenging expectation to combat. So the more people who are involved, the more transparent this process is, and the more clearly defined it is, the easier it is to manage expectations with leaders and teams and employees. And anger and frustration appears where expectations are not met. So you need to use what you have available to get ahead of that piece of it.
Nice. That's great. Well, I really appreciate you diving into all kinds of different little corners of this topic around position management. Maybe we'll wrap up just kind of thinking about what are some key takeaways if you were talking with anyone in HR today, sort of like what's one key thing or one mindset that you could change within a business to make this go a little bit smoother for them. Michelle, you have one on top of your head there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to understanding your partner's pain points, especially if you want to build, get the buy-in for any kind of change.
Yeah.
So build that relationship, listen to their pain points. You're going to have this amazing solution. It's going to be great. You're going to solve all their problems.
Right.
But if you spring it on them late in the game, you will not get the buy-in that you want, and things won't really change. So I would just say, start socializing early. If currently you're in spreadsheets and you're going to move to more of a position management system, get started early.
Very good. How about you, Theresa?
I would say the core piece is just to align on shared decision or shared definitions, so everyone's speaking the same language, and going from there, everything else is downhill. As long as we've started at the same point, we can overcome disagreements along the way and actually come to constructive solutions.
Very good. Andrew?
I think the mindset shift would be move upstream from service provider in filling the rec or leveling the job to consultative approach with the business leader in terms of how to support the work that needs to be done, whether it be humans in job A, B, or C, or tech or whatever, and include finance in the room as you're running some of those modeling scenarios.
That's great. Yeah. I think I was definitely kind of, as we close with the scenario part of it and everything, just thinking so much about how both HR and finance are supportive functions to the business. We are not driving the business success in a lot of ways. That is actively happening out in the business. And there is so much going on that you want to be a part of. It really is kind of collaborating, bringing those outside leaders in, understanding their needs, as well as what finance is trying to identify, what they're hoping to support the business with, as much as HR is trying to support the business in their achievement on that too. So to the extent you can move upstream and be that instigator, that person that's really trying to bring people to the table, I think that makes such a huge difference for you, not just from a company perspective, but overall, like, I just enjoy my career more when I feel like I'm getting more from the people around me. I feel like I'm collaborating, bringing people together, hopefully, solving some problems around that. It just makes me feel better as an individual and what we're trying to do in business today. But any parting thoughts? Anything else that we didn't touch on?
My favorite line from Andrew during PLA: "We are here to help the business meet its goals." And I say that probably once a week. Just it helps to level set expectations.
There it is. That's the PLA plug right there. So definitely, feel free to connect with any of us on LinkedIn. Certainly connect with Andrew in the PLA community. Lots of great opportunities. So many great insights. Andrew also has a podcast that he does under the PLA name. So definitely check that out. Feel free to reach out to me for any resources around Candor IQ, other things that are happening in this space. I think for the most part, we're here as well just to kind of support our customers in achieving, hopefully, better collaboration, more coordination within their finance and HR organizations as well. But thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules today to talk with us, and we'll be talking more in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.